The breaking news earlier today, French police are reportedly going to start intercepting migrant boats crossing the English Channel, following months of arguments with the UK over the danger of such operations.
Well, this comes as the French newspaper Le Monde says that they've obtained an official document signed by 4 prefects responsible for beaches around Calais and Dunkirk, from which thousands of migrants head off to England every day.
Well, Mark White, our home and security editor, is here to bring us all the details. Mark, I've got so many questions, but what's the crux of this new policy by the French?
Well, the policy is to try to intercept these migrant boats soon after they launch, and in particular, actually, taxi boats that launch in the river systems, come down the river systems, then hover offshore with about 20 migrants or so on board that then help the other migrants, 60 or however many it might be, that wade into the water to get on the boat. So the policy is to allow the maritime gendarmerie to, with the rigid inflatables, push these migrant boats in shallow and calm waters back to the shore. Seems very sensible. The French policing unions have been very reluctant to go down this road, though, because they see a future in which something does happen that ends in tragedy and they get hung out to dry by the French politicians. So they are not at all happy about being put into a potentially vulnerable position. Having said that, the British government wants to see this and wants to see this as a matter of urgency. You'll remember that Sir Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper announced this policy back in April, 8 months ago. And no movement so far on it, except, regular sort of updates saying, well, the policy is still on track as far as we know. So the latest development would seem to be actually a significant step forward in that the 4 maritime prefectures that align that coastline from Dunkirk through Calais, the Pas de Calais, down towards the Boulogne area, have all signed up to this to allow for this new tactic to be used. So now, if they haven't trained, it would be about the training and operationalising it. It's difficult to overstate just how welcome this would be for Sir Keir Starmer.
And it has worked in Belgium, hasn't it? The Belgians have been doing this,
yes,
and they have managed to minimise crossings.
That's an excellent point. They have been doing it for years now, and they just don't take any nonsense. They push the boats back. If they're quite a bit offshore, then they'll take the migrants off the boats and onto their boats and land them back onshore. And they have seen, as a result of this, from what was an expanding migrant problem that was going to potentially mirror France, it's disappeared to just a few attempts by occasional boats. But they're so on top of the situation. And obviously the British government wants to see the French doing likewise. But hey, you get a Gallic shrug of the shoulders and 6 months later, nothing has happened.
They're quite into forceful policing, though, aren't they? I'm sure they'll find their way.
Well, this is the thing, right, Mark? We've heard these stories time and time again. We've heard these policies coming out of France. Oh, yeah, we're going to wade into the waters. We're going to stop the boats. We've given them £500 million. And actually, the boats have just got more fast and furiously coming to Britain. Do we actually think this is going to make any difference? Do you think there's actually real appetite for the French to stop the boats?
If there's a real commitment to this tactic, it could make a difference. But it's like everything else. You quite rightly mentioned the other tactics of wading into the water, of puncturing the boats. We only see a few occasions where this has happened. Yeah. And that's quite simply because you've got upwards of 100 migrants there. All young men, apart from maybe 2 or 3 women and children. The vast majority are young men, angry young men, if the police intervene to try to stop their attempt to get into the channel. And we've seen from past endeavours by the police that usually you may have about half a dozen officers or so. So they are really putting themselves at risk of serious harm by trying to enact that tactic. And it's going to be exactly the same with the maritime gendarmerie. If they try to push the boats back, nobody should think that for a second the migrants are just going to sit there and allow their boats to be pushed back. They will fight back and try and push their way through. So I think the French police unions are right to highlight a potential problem here in that it could all go horribly wrong and they may be hung out to dry by the political leaders.
Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living, and maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of Tally Money, Cameron Parry. Cameron, What is tally money?
Well, Bev, with Tally Money, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at Tally Money. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind the more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you.
People forget they are gangs. They are violent. There are organised, violent gangs involved in this. And as Damien says here on your say, I'll believe it when I see it. And I think I stand with Damien on that one, unfortunately.
There have been dozens of shootings and stabbings that have taken place in the migrant camps and on the beaches as you got sort of gang rivalry between the various migrant factions. You've got African migrants in particular that don't want to pay or can't afford to pay the price to get on the boat. So their tactic is 30 of them to storm a boat as it's launching and fight their way on board. It's really dangerous out there. And of course, these are people heading to our shores.
Yeah.
Yes.
And 12 or 13 French police would be very vulnerable in that situation.
Yeah.
You will. Mark White, thank you very much for joining us, bring us that breaking news story today. And just a reminder, Friends of GB News is where you can vote for free in today's You Decide poll. You can scan that QR code on the screen right now. And we're asking, who should take responsibility for stopping the small boats? Britain or France? Get in touch with us.
Well, moving on now. President Donald Trump has said he'll permanently pause migration from all third world countries after 2 National Guard members were shot in Washington, D.C. by an Afghan suspect.
The president said he would terminate millions of admissions under Joe Biden and remove anyone who is not a net asset to the United States.
Well, on your say, Maggie says Trump is trying to keep US citizens safe. How can that be wrong?
Dave says, suggest if you want to visit the US, do so now. Another few months, the UK will become a third world country. Well, we are now joined by human rights lawyer David Hay. David Hay, thank you very much for joining us this morning. You see some of the thoughts of our viewers there over this change in tact from Donald Trump. Will he come into any difficulty with the way that the law is written in the United States? Many in Britain here will see that as a very welcome policy if we were to have it here. But can Donald Trump actually do this if he wants to?
I think it's good afternoon. I think it's certainly a lot. Good morning, even. I think it's certainly a lot easier for Donald Trump to do that type of a policy there than it would be for Keir Starmer, even if he wanted to do it, Keir Starmer here. Impossible. But I think Trump, as always, what with his words, not very, very clear. What is a third world country? What is an asset? It's all going to come down to that. We all probably remember the Muslim ban that he in his first term. So I think that will be the thing where if he can actually put this into clear, consistent, actual legislation, because a third world country, what does that mean in this day and age? And I think that's the problems he's going to have. He's also going to have a lot of problems, I think, when it looks at various areas, there's going to be lots of challenges, but he's obviously a very determined president.
Yes, exactly, David. And this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, we saw in his first term that there was he brought out quite quickly a Muslim country ban, as it was dubbed at least, where he was concerned about immigration from, places he would describe as third world countries. How do we define that term? Because this is one thing that's really set the left of X on fire today when we use the word third world country. How would we define that?
I think it's very difficult now. And I think when you've got someone like Trump with the amount of power that he has at the moment, is he going to, we know he's friends with the ruler of Saudi. The ruler of Saudi is known around the world for as many bad things, a human rights tyrant, a dictator, similar in the UAE. He's also friends with people in the UAE. We would, in 50 odd years ago or a few years ago, they would be classed as third world countries. They're not democratic. They're run by dictators. They've got appalling human rights records, but they're exceptionally wealthy and they're friends of Trump. Will they now be allowed in? So I think this is who's going to make those decisions. And I think that's when it starts to get a bit worrying, when you have politicians deciding areas like that, who can come into the country and who can't, with unchecked power. I think that's the worry, because how do we define a third world country these days? Is it on the gross domestic product? Is it on their laws, their human rights? Is it if they're a democracy? How do we define that? And I think that's an impossibility, really. And the fact that I think Trump obviously has, like I said, a lot of friends that are a lot of very bad people, dictators and despots around the world. Will they suddenly become the first world?
One of the paradigms that Trump referred to in his tweet was about being compatible with Western civilization. But of course, one of the principal values of Western civilization is respect for the rule of law. And I think most people would agree that it's perfectly legitimate for the government to change the law in terms of numbers of immigration, salary caps, things like that. But one of the things that Trump seems to want to do is, he says, denaturalize people who have immigrant backgrounds who break the law. Do you think there's an ethical or even a Western case for removing citizenship from people once we've already given it to them?
I think Miriam, I think that is such a dangerous, slippery slope to open up, because who makes those decisions? On what basis? I mean, I certainly don't want a politician that's elected on popularity or unpopularity, in the case of perhaps our current government, making a decision on whether or not someone who is existingly a British national is able to stay or not. I think that's a very, very dangerous thing to open up. There should be a complete process involving the courts, the judiciary, and obviously the legislation at the time. But I think if we just suddenly allow politicians to put in place a process where they can decide who can and who cannot be at any particular time be a national of that country, that's dangerous.
Thank you for joining us, David Hay, human rights lawyer there. Thank you very much. I just want to really bring attention to a post that was written by the Department of State in the 21st of November, because they actually sent a message to us and to European leaders. They said, today the State Department instructed US embassies to report on the human rights implications and public safety impacts of mass migration. Mass migration is a human rights concern. Western nations have endured crime waves, terror attacks, sexual assault and displacement of communities. US officials will urge governments to take bold action. They are getting more involved, the Americans, on this issue. They aren't shying away from it now, and I think this crisis in America has only spurred them to take the action they were probably going to take in a matter of weeks' time. There we go.